Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as we welcome Jon Yarian, a two-time founder and author of the new book, Spark, 24 Concepts to Ignite, Upstick, or Supercharge Your Work Life, which explores workplace productivity, trends, and shares advice for founders. Now, Jon is a writer, speaker, serial entrepreneur, and a performance coach. Previously, Jon founded a strategic communications consultancy, served as a press secretary on Capitol Hill, and led the national accounts for a Washington, D.C. public relations firm. Welcome to Adjusted Reality, Jon.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, we're going to take this on a very inconceivable journey because Adjusted Reality is looking at health, but I looked at this book and I thought, what a beautiful combination, because as our listeners, who are now vast in 101 countries, need to look at their health, but what defines your health is so vast. And one piece of it, ladies and gentlemen, is in fact your work life. And sometimes it can be up to 80% of your life. So we're going to bring Jon into this discussion about really looking at his new book, Spark, and then trying to think about our own lives and what it means. Now, the book Spark is not your average business book. And what I want to ask, jumping right in, Jon, what sets this book apart? And where were you and your co-author, Chris Metler, writing to specifically?
Well, anyone who's spent time with the book can tell that it's not really a business book. It's going to be found in the business section of most bookstores, but it's really just kind of a way to talk about things that we thought are very relevant, that produce performance and make a difference in people's lives, and most obviously show up in work. But the title is very intentional. We talk about your work life. We don't use a word like career because we think those terms kind of abstract the truth, which is that you are who you are wherever you are. And so being intentional, being well, and all that you do is really, really meaningful and makes a big difference.
Very much agree. And as I was reading through it, I saw so many really important concepts that transcend business. And so while it might be found in the business section, a lot of our listeners today, I think you're going to find a vast opportunity to stretch not only your work life, but think about how your health is impacted from some of these 24 concepts. So let's get right into it. We got a lot to cover. There's 24, but we won't get to all of them. Listen, your book contains the 24 concepts to start, upstick, or supercharge your work life. Now tell us, actually, as I always like the backstory, what sparked you to start this conversation?
Chris, my co-author, and I work with a lot of business leaders and senior teams. We invest in companies and create companies, and that has us in this really fun position, which is interacting with high performers, intelligent, ambitious people, and talking to them about how they work and how they think about work. And as we mentioned a moment ago, how you work and how you live are all connected, right? So we're in that conversation, getting clear on some things that really made a big difference for us and for the teams that we work with. And it honestly seemed strange not to share that. It's a message that we knew would make a difference for a lot of people. And we believe that success is an unlimited resource. So your success does not diminish my success. It actually just creates more for everybody. So as we talked about this stuff and lived it, it almost felt like an imperative to share it. And that's really the place it came from, is like there wouldn't be a way to be consistent with the concepts in the book if we didn't make an effort to make them accessible to everyone.
You're very on task, and one of the pieces starts with leadership. And to me, in order to have the best health you can have and be the best and most productive um, life you would desire, you need to start with yourself, leading yourself, and the ability to lead. I want you to tap into, for me, what is the authentic leader, and what difference does an authentic leader have to do with being productive?
We love to talk about leadership, and it's one of those funny words that everyone knows, and everyone knows what it means. But you don't meet very many people who can live it or seem to know how to create it. And so that's part of the premise of the book, is we wanted to break down these ideas that are ones that seemingly everyone knows or thinks they know, but they don't really know how to do it. And the analogy we've used is like, I know what a quiche is. I've had one before. I could point it out for you. Like, I know about quiche. And if you put me in a kitchen and gave me all day, I couldn't create one. Right. So I know it, but I don't know it well enough to produce it. And leadership is like that. People have a sense of it, but don't really know how to practically perform it. And for us, it all starts with getting clear about something outside yourself and committing yourself to it. And you could apply that to your own health as well, even though that might sound odd, but it's getting clear about something that has you get past your fears or hesitations and starts to unlock the steps that would be necessary to achieve it.
It's interesting as we kind of dive into these very important concepts. And your work life is so incredible because it's how, and you said it best, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And performance in life is very much, are you able to lead? And I like going back into that authentic piece. And one of the parts that resonated for me as I was reading it is focusing on service. And in work life, that's an interesting piece. But what I often see, since we just been through a pandemic and a lot of people are suffering still with depression, is that if you focus on service in a cause greater than yourself, you tend to pick up by your bootstraps and start to really notice life's getting easier. Share with me how that concept in your book was explored.
Well, the way, and for listeners, each of these concepts, these are short chapters. These are meant for you to consume and start to practice immediately. I mean, they're like 1,500 words. And the book doesn't need to be read in any particular order. There's 24 concepts. You could throw it up in the air. It could fall down in any order, and you'll get value out of it. Leadership is such an interesting one, though, in that there's a little bit of it in almost everything else. And it's a way of getting past yourself to make something happen. And if we think about that in the context of wellness, particularly for folks who are depressed or struggling to find motivation, it can be useful, putting that leader mindset on to think about what you might mean to somebody else or the difference you want to make to somebody else, and how being whole and healthy could serve that goal. Right? So if you have kids or colleagues or people that count on you, one way to access that leadership in the domain of personal health is to say, who would I want to be in 10 or 15 years for this person who loves me or counts on me? And then you go, okay, now there's a program taking shape in my mind called Get Healthy, because of what I want to create that doesn't have anything to do with my depression or maybe laziness or whatever it is. I can get past all of that because I've now organized myself around a project and can be a leader in it. And you can apply that anywhere. But in wellness, I think that's such an interesting one. When you take yourself out of it and think about, who could I make a difference for if I were healthy, if I were reliable and knew that I would be around to serve that person or that interest later on.
Well said. And, as we start to get into these concepts and just building our health and obviously building our work life and being authentic to yourself, being able to explore other people's assistance in getting them the purpose-driven life. One of the other pieces is that purpose. And I enjoyed looking at the magic as you quoted, is the magic cure to what ails those suffering, perhaps with apathy. Like they don't really know where they're going and they don't even really understand the path. And sometimes they just, like you said, they got this good job. It's good enough. Life is okay. I'm not fully stimulated, but I'm not, maybe even ready to change it because I haven't really looked internally for a long time. And some of us, much like our health is, we're not sick, but we're not turned on. Like we're not passionate and vibrant. Talk to me a little bit about that, Jon, when you see it as purpose.
Yeah, purpose is a really exciting topic and a challenging one because it has all of us really considering how often or how consistently we operate with purpose versus just live in kind of default mode. And what's true for most of us, and it's okay, but we have to acknowledge it, is you sort of come up through school and you have a peer group and you do all these things. And in reality, what you're mostly doing is trying to fit in to be acceptable to other people and do well enough to avoid rejection. That's mostly what's happening, right? And that's not wrong, that's natural, but there's so much more to life. And purpose is discovering something that might have you at risk of showing up a little bit different than others, right? Of carving out a path that maybe wasn't predictable or isn't the one that's most obvious for you. And we all fear that a little bit, right? We all fear being different or being rejected. But for so many people, and it hits everybody at a different age, but you might get to your late 20s or early 30s and you realize you're just doing stuff, right? You just have this job and maybe you're not very fit. And it's all here in this safe, squishy space, right? Where we're being acceptable to others and not being rejected, but there's not much else going on. And that creates this itch or this drive to discover something else. And purpose is the solution to that. Purpose is the thing that's like you're going to set yourself out to do or be, that's going to have you be different, but start to produce every other result in your life.
It's so important when you start thinking about purpose. And what I do very much appreciate about your book is you're spot on. You can throw the book up in the air and pick a chapter. And I'm kind of doing that with my audience right now is there's so much in it. And it's a reflective time. It's a time for you to reflect on who are you? What are you doing? What is your purpose? What is your passion? Are you leading authentically? Are you actually allowing people to come in your life and say what you mean and mean what you say and have this power? So now I'm going to go to power because power is one of those places where we can actually access the possibilities to change. And that's where personal power plays a role because I've had veterans that have lost limbs and their personal power is so vibrant and so on fire that they don't see a restriction or any disability anymore because, this is how I live my life. It used to be this way in chapter 1, but now I'm in chapter 7. I don't have my lower limbs, but I have a vibrant passion. I have a purpose and I have a personal power that really ignites everything that I do. So now when you get to personal power, how do you see your personal power showcasing productivity?
Yep. So to start, I would say that a lot of people hold the definition that power has something to do with authority over or control of something. Like that's maybe what power would be. Like if I was bigger than you or had a weapon or something and you didn't, that would give me power over you. And anyone who's a parent, anyone who's managed anyone, if you've run a business, if you've been in anything like that, you really quickly realize how little control you actually have over anything. You can't really make anybody do anything. That kind of authority is very, very limited. And this would show up in a doctor-patient relationship, entrepreneur to employee, and again, parents to kids. Something else has to happen. And that's where we can start to exercise power. But the way we define power is in the power is in the potential, right? The possibility of what could be occur if you and I work together to achieve an outcome. And so there are times when I've experienced power and influence from others, but in that moment, the way it occurred to me, it was like this cool thing you and I get to do together, like this podcast. I'm excited to be here, and I'm here on time to be with you. So you've used power to make this happen, but it didn't look like authority or control, right? It's collaboration and something we want. So we all have that, and we don't need a business card that tells other people we have power, right? We don't need a title. And the other cool thing about it is power begets more power. So as you start to feel that in your life and take initiative and move and act in ways that produce power, you will only become more powerful. It doesn't run out. It only enlarges. And that's where you can encounter, and I love that you referenced, veterans who at a glance you would think would be having some experience of losing power. And yet in their presence, you can feel how powerful they really are. And you and I both know people with, perfectly fine functioning limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs, not very powerful.
Yes.
And we've
Yes.
both been around people who were, in theory, diminished or disfigured, and in reality were more powerful than ever. So that's, I think, an exciting message for anyone struggling with, not feeling like they have the circumstances or the trappings of power. It's like, well, you don't need that anyway. That really doesn't help. If you're listening to this, you can be powerful in your relationships and in your life today. It's really about making a choice and seeing yourself as having the possibility for it.
Oh, that is, I think, what ignites this audience is we're injecting it through every episode, experts like you that come in and they identify where the opportunities are in your life. And sometimes it is a big adjustment, which is why it's adjusted reality. And one piece that hit me really, really hard and made me reflect, being vulnerable and being open to conversations, and then setting that purpose. What are the potential opportunities that come in? And it then came to another chapter that made me go, okay, focus.
Mhm.
And for many of us, social media has become the antithesis to focus. And Jon, I'm so glad you're here and you took on this topic because it is relevant, extraordinarily important, and can change your life. That's how important focus is. And I'd like you to really talk about focus. And then I want you to talk about what most of us think we're doing, which is very important to be aware of. And that is thinking that you can juggle things at the same time.
Oh, sure.
So
Multitasking.
yeah, let's share with our audience about focus.
Yep. So I'll get to focus in just a second, but before I do, what I want to make sure the audience can hear is like, this is really just an exercise in getting specific enough about these ideas that you can practically apply them and notice if it's working or not working. And a lot of times in life, we don't want to get very specific, because if we get specific, that's when this thing comes up called the possibility of failure. But if I never get specific, I can't ever fail, right? I'm just doing whatever I'm doing. And so for us in each of these concepts, I've talked about 4 and we'll talk about more. It's about getting specific enough to really get clear on how this is operating in your life and whether or not it's working. And then you live with the consequences. The good news is that's where performance comes from, because now you know if it's happening or not. So for any of these, it's just an exercise in specificity. So focus, for us, focus is about turning off the noise, excluding, removing everything that's in the way, and committing yourself to something in a way that produces deep work and meaningful progress. And this has to be intentionally created. It doesn't just occur. It's a decision. And for most people, it's a muscle you have to build, because you've likely been habituated over time to having a very short attention span and a very strong impulse to look at something different or do something different. And that's where we have to challenge ourselves to this deeper level of concentration, because it's a little bit like, a long distance runner would relate to this, but you're not going to get to that sensation until like the 8th, 9th, or 10th mile. Like you got to push through to really have that. And there are levels of creativity and insight that folks rarely get to because they've never committed themselves long enough to the focus it would take. And what they're often doing is what you referenced earlier, is they think they're multitasking. I'm
Right.
doing multiple things at once. The truth, and this is, by the way, pretty easy to prove scientifically, is you are not actually multitasking. You cannot do multiple things at once. What you're doing is switching really quickly, a lot. You're diverting attention from one thing to another. And the cost of that is really, really high. And I think we referenced, there's a brilliant guy named Cal Newport who wrote a book called Deep Work, which I recommend. And he has a lot to say about the cost of switching and what's actually happening when you think you're multitasking. In reality, you're just not doing anything very well. That's what's happening when you're multitasking. So we definitely preach focus here for sure.
Is I go through the different concepts and I start to recognize how they flow really well to each other. And I think that's the brilliant aspect of Spark is if you want to change your life, you do have to focus, and the focus should be read the book. Get to a place where you can have the time to sit quietly. And for me, I was very fortunate coming back on the weekend from the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And, there's a whole science and art and professionalism that goes with yoga. And it really helped me be mindful of what I'm doing, mindful in how I respond and react. And I want our listeners to be able to really dive into the concept of focus. Because if there's one thing that really does cause problems for people is they're not listening. And oftentimes that, as we get to this kind of area of, I liked in the book, it's called co-creation, and we're talking about, work life. But think about this, if you're a doctor and you're listening, or you're a patient that's listening, is that there's a relationship between a doctor and a patient, much like if you're co-creating and being entrepreneurial. And John, this is where I'm going to have you jump in. You have to reach, number one, the same level of clarity about what you want. Now, oftentimes we think we know what someone wants, but we're not clear on it. And that puts us in this huge and unfortunate outcome decline. The outcome is very different, and one person's going to win, and unfortunately the other person may not be in the same realm of, well, that was a success, and they're kind of leaving deflated. Talk to us about co-creation and how you saw it in your book.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to be really practical, if I'm going to co-create with somebody like we are right now, you're co-creating something called a podcast. The first element of that is the work I do within myself before I see you, before I join the podcast, or for any practitioner who's listening, before you go into the patient room, there's something you do within yourself, which is take stock of what's happening for you and get clear and be prepared to receive from this new person like you don't already know what they're like. And what you'll discover is oftentimes you have this instinctive anticipation, like you think you know what it's like to be on a podcast called Adjusted Reality, but you don't, because you haven't been here before. So if I can get clear about that, I can show up in a way that has me ready to truly listen and to react from where the other person actually is. And that's what's missing so often is we're all living inside of our predetermined expectations. And then we talk past each other. Because I have this idea of what I think the podcast is supposed to be, and you're doing something else, and now it's just whatever. So that presence piece is the first and essential ingredient to co-creation, because it allows me to have some acknowledgement of the truth as you see it. Now, I don't need to share the same truth. I don't have to think the same as you do, but I need to have an acknowledgement that you have your truth, and there is a way the world looks from where you sit. And if I can see that, not be in combat with it, but look to discover if in between your truth and my truth, there's something we could do together, we're going to create much faster and more effectively. But that's only going to happen if I can bring myself to it in a way that's like open and available. And again, not needing you to know or behave in my truth, right? I'm not trying to enforce it on you, but rather giving everybody space to see what can be created in between us. That's where the magic happens.
Oh, it is. It is magic. Actually, when you think about it, John, and you've inspired me to think about this differently already. You come with a willingness to learn. That comes from both the patient and the doctor. If the patient comes in with an already preconceived, I just want an opiate. Okay. I have chronic pain. I've had it for 30 years. I don't need your song and dance about how I should be doing this and how I should be doing that. The discussion is broken right there. And if the doctor comes in and all their focus is to grab out their prescription pad and decide what medication is going to be best in almost a self-limiting assessment of what the outcomes could be, because they didn't even listen to the patient. And oftentimes, and you said it so well, is you come with a preconceived how you think it's going to go, so you almost stop listening.
Well, the problem is not the patient's desire for an opiate. That's unhelpful, but that's not the problem. The problem is your anticipation that there will be conflict if you do not prescribe it. That's the problem. So what happens is you have this anticipation for conflict, and it creates you as defensive and closed, right, in preparation to fight. Guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a fight. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's listening to this has had an experience of being with somebody whose shoulders were already up, hackles are up, right? And it's already happening out of that, anticipation for self-defense. You can be with anybody. Like that patient's desire to skip past all this wonderful information and just get some opiates, that's pretty typical. If you can be with them in a way that has them see that there's no conflict here, there's just more process and conversation, you could create something called, we're not doing an opiate prescription and we didn't fight. That can happen.
And it's glorious when it does.
That's great. Well, that's where the work is. And that's the other piece of this is like, that's so valuable and meaningful. Like we would all like for our patients to be perfectly well-balanced emotionally and psychologically and want to participate with us in our expertise in exactly the right way. That would be nice. It very rarely happens. And if we get caught up in our frustrations about that, it just limits our impact. It limits the way we impact the world. And so that's where in the phrase we use, like, that's where the work is. It's that patient you kind of didn't want to see. You can make a huge difference, but it starts with where you're at before you come in the room.
It's so insightful to walk in a room with an open mind as a doctor. So doctors, please reflect on your day and how you turn the doorknob to that room. Is your mind ready to listen? Mm-hmm. And are you ready to do the work with the patient? Because time and energy is exactly what you put in the book, is the work. If both patients can come, and this is what I like about it, because if you're that person who wants to get the best result, who wants to be better, no matter what, if it's work life, whether it's your health, maybe it's an athletic performance, maybe it's making that next $1 million, it comes from something deep within. It's the open-mindedness, the opportunities. And when you have that purpose, then you start to develop more and more on your passion, on what it means. And then you did something really important in the book that talks about how you help others. And many times some will come with you with some kind of self-limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. And they play these in the workplace, and it ends up typically coming towards a burnout. What strategies can individuals adopt to cultivate kind of a more resilient mindset so that they steer away from that burnout? And I know it's a complicated answer because you could take all 24 concepts, but let's see what you have to say in there.
Here's what I would say, and this has a lot of application to physical health and wellness as well, is you look at a book like ours and it sort of seems like self-help. And there's a perception of like, oh, well, this is effort, right? So John and Dr. McAllister are trying to get me to change and put effort into being a better person. That's one sort of reaction to it. And what I would have people notice is just how much effort it takes to be inauthentic or out of shape. It takes a lot of effort.
It does.
Like, it's exhausting. Okay. Anybody who's in a not great marriage, you know that that's super tiring. If you're in a job that doesn't inspire you, it's exhausting. Okay. if you're listening and you're overweight, and I wish the best for you, you know that that's not actually the easy way to live. It's harder. It hurts. It's uncomfortable. So there's so much effort over there. And that's where the burnout comes from, to your question, is people who are trapped inside of inauthentic ways of being, who are limited, right, by these about themselves or others, are really prone to exhaustion and depression because of all of the effort it takes to just push forward. And so a lot of times that burnout can be a breaking point that's really wonderful because it has somebody ready for something different and saying, I just can't live this way anymore. I can't continue. And then you can kind of get to what else is there, right? What do you want to be about? What is your passion? What would you like to, how would you want to feel? How do you want your body to be? I don't root for anybody to have a breakdown, but at the same time, I love a breakthrough. And sometimes it requires burnout or something like it to get there.
There's a famous quote that always stuck with me, and it's called "Setbacks are set up for comebacks." And as a performance coach yourself, you've seen many setbacks, and you kind of in your mind, a lot of times when you've done this repetitively, you can see the potential, and then you can see that they're not hitting it yet,
Mhm.
and that they're doing things that undermine their best interest. Share with me some of your experiences that really impacted how you as a performance coach approached the individual or the concept so that you can start juicing the life out of them so they start performing
Mhm.
at the potential that you know they should be at or could be at or would be at if
Yeah.
they stop doing all of these self deprecating
Yeah.
things.
Well, a really cool thing about my work is having the chance to be with people and having them start to notice this unstoppable, kind of restless energy inside themselves, right? If you're still listening to this podcast or other episodes of this wonderful program, there's something happening for you, and there's more that you want in your life, right? Because you're trying to connect with information that could make it possible. So it's very, very, very rare for me to meet somebody who's just perfectly satisfied inside of their kind of mediocre situation, and it's all, they might pretend to for a minute, but they're not, because they've got that thing we all have. We're all the star of our movie, and we want that to come out. And so it's really just about having them notice how small their imagination is for themselves, particularly when you compare it to their imagination for someone else or someone they care about. It can be challenging to get somebody to think big about themselves, but what you can do is get them talking about their spouse or their children or someone they admire at work, and all of a sudden the sky's the limit. And you have them compare it, and it gets really interesting because the only difference is that they don't believe that they're entitled to it or have permission or whatever it is that everybody else has. And talking at that and using exercises and techniques to kind of open that up is what really gets the process going. But it's all in there. We all want it. It's just about tapping into it and finding ways to make it practical and something that people can really deploy in real life.
Tapping into it is the critical component to all of it. It's finding the resources that will help you to unlock this beautiful next phase to your life. And like you said, very few of us are ever at that point where we're like, yeah, I got it, but we're happy. But can we be happier? And I look back to some of the pages in the first few chapters, and Chris Metler, your co-author, I think for many of you listening will resonate with this. It's that feeling that you didn't deserve to be here, that there is almost you're faking it, like you're trying to be this person because that's how you think that person got in the door. And maybe you could kind of go over the impersonator kind of feeling, because it does resonate with a lot of leaders that I've spoke to that have done fantastically amazing things, yet they don't feel like they own it or they're in it. They're almost feeling like they impersonated someone to get there.
Yeah, I think we all, like I referenced earlier, we all have a strong impulse to fit in and be acceptable to others. And that's important because for most of the span of our species, that was how we survived, right? Was in groups, defending each other, hunting together. Like social connectedness is really important. So we all have this very strong desire to be acceptable to each other and to fit in. And we can all relate to that. If you've been to high school, you have a memory of like desperately wanting to fit in. But what that can engender over time is just a bunch of mimicry behavior, right? Well, this is what people seem to do at this company, so I'll generally do it too. And we end up kind of dressing alike and sort of doing similar things and getting a little older. And then that original differentiating spark can get harder and harder to find. And for some people, they realize they're spending really large amounts of time pretending to be this person that other people think they know, right? And that can be a little distressing as you start to realize it and bring up imposter syndrome and kind of all this other stuff. I think this book is an interesting opportunity for anybody who feels that way to get specific enough in certain ways of being that they could puncture that, find ways out of it, and get out of this kind of exhausting life of pretending to be this thing, but never really knowing it or owning it for what it is. And a big part of the process is what we're doing right now. It's being with you, and you're a person I know from listening to the show who asks great questions out loud, is not pretending to know everything, as experienced and accomplished as you are. And what you've seen is all the benefit from that, this lifelong learning, this evolution that's all very public. It's a podcast, but it doesn't diminish you at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. But it allows you to be your authentic self because that search for meaning continues, and in this case is very public, and it's a great example for people who feel trapped inside of something that's fake.
I hope they hear those words that you just said, is open yourself up, be vulnerable. And there's no greater way to be vulnerable than to be in the media. And I know, Jon, from your past experience being at the Washington, D.C. level, vulnerability is something you try really hard not to be, because you don't want people poking holes into what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, you go home and you own you. You work like you are at home as you are at your job, and that's a really important and for many, it's a concept that it eludes you because you get into a position where perhaps you feel like you don't have the qualifications, and that's not one of the pieces that we're talking about. Is the continuous learning and being the best you can be is always a critical component, and having the best health you can have is one of, in my mind, one of the most important things you own. Health is wealth. And if you want to be wealthy and you want to be that entrepreneur, or you want to be, heading to the presidency level, or you just want to be the best in the job that you love, then consider who in your heart you really are to give the best you can give on any given day. And Jon, I think that's one of the pieces that your book brings out. It's so much. 24 concepts is great, but if you took them just one day at a time, it's almost a month worth. If you threw in some meditations and reflections, and you could read it over and over again.
Well, going back to the focus piece, we wrote the book for who our readers are now. Mm-hmm. Short attention span, distracted, frustrated. We wrote the book for them. And so these chapters are very short on purpose to have it something that you can get through and put into practice and start to develop momentum, right? Because the whole charter was like, we're going to be committed to making a difference for our readers. That's very different than writing a book to make ourselves seem smart. Big distinction. If we want to deliver value on every page of the book, then there can't be an ounce of fat on it. And we need to gear it for the audience, not for what we would, imagine will make us look the best. And so that was all very intentional. Yeah, and I my hope is that people can get into it and somewhere, right? Maybe it's focus, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's something else. Find a little crack, find a little opening, and start to see the power they have in their own lives. And it's going to show up everywhere. There wouldn't be a way to start to have the lights come on and not reach some pretty profound conclusions about how you want to manage your health, how you want to show up for your family and for your colleagues, physically, and how it's all connected. There wouldn't be a way to level up in one area and just completely fall off in another. It doesn't work like that. And so I think there's going to be a bunch of secondary and tertiary benefits as well.
I agree with you because I kind of saw it as climbing a stairwell, knowing that there's no way you could fall backwards. That
Mhm.
if you start climbing and there's 24 steps, you'll never go backwards.
No.
And Jon, you've written it with such enthusiasm, and Chris put the passion and the purpose, the focus and the opportunities, the co-creation. So much of it is just looking at your life from the outside in. And Jon, I want to ask you, what was the most as you were writing the book with Chris, just personally, what was the chapter for you that resonated the most in your life?
Well, we already talked about leadership a little bit. I have to come back to it. And this is one that I've wrestled with, but also meant a lot to me to write. And I love to connect with people on the subject because, getting really clear about accomplishing something outside yourself requires you to take stock of like whether or not you're the right person to do it. And that's what we want to avoid a lot of times. If you and I were going to create the world's greatest podcast, if that was our goal, and that was really my goal, then I would have to really look at whether or not I was the right co-host, and I might not be. If I start out with the notion that I have to be the co-host, that's a different agenda. That's not going to be the world's greatest podcast. So leadership starts with like getting your mind on something outside yourself and then doing whatever is necessary, right? Understanding that to achieve the goal. And the book was the same kind of challenge because when you write a book, you really want to sound smart and you want people to compliment you. And all this human stuff comes up because you're very exposed. And with every single page, it was a challenge to say, okay, what if this page only served the reader? Let's get rid of this fancy word. Let's get rid of this thing. We're not going to include this story. And so if you read the book, you'll notice there is none of us in it. It is not about me or Chris. It does not reference our careers or our backgrounds, even though we had a strong impulse to do that because that makes us sound smart and feel good. But it was a leadership challenge all the way through, and the leadership section really confronted me with that. And it was one of the first sections we wrote, and it charted a course for the rest of the manuscript, and really did not give me a lot of wiggle room to try to make myself look fancy in the book. So it was pretty powerful.
You see why I asked the question now, because you're not in the book.
No.
And so many of the authors, it does become a book, almost a monologue about the author. And yet here I have, pages and chapters and concepts and an extraordinarily talented co-author set that chose specifically not to have their story in it because it's your story. And it's your story to tell when you read it. It's your story to engage in the pages in a way that is individual, just like your healthcare is. What's good for me may not be good for you. I love to run. There's my husband who's like, whatever you want to do, but we could go for a hike. So it's coming to what's right for you and then building those co-creative moments. And the chapters themselves allow you to hyper focus if you give it the time and the talent and the energy and the reservation of you're not good enough, you're not capable, all of those unfortunate self-limiting beliefs. they start to slip away. Would you agree, Jon, when you start thinking about, you come in with a concept and you are unsure and you're scared and you have fear and you're kind of bringing up your own self-limiting beliefs, that as you go through that, those 24 concepts
Well,
kind of pull it out.
self-limiting beliefs are reinforced by limited outcomes, by unproductive activities. So if I come into a patient room to treat a patient and I'm not clear about my intention, I'm not clear about my commitment, and so the human being comes in and I get offended, and the patient who wanted opioids or whatever storms out, I haven't produced a valuable outcome, right? Nothing really productive has happened. And that's going to tap into my self-limiting beliefs about my patients are crazy or whatever times, whatever I want to tell myself to live in this area of limited accomplishment. If I can get clear about my commitment and show up like a leader, meaning I'm going to make a difference in this person's health and wellness today, right? That's different than sounding smart, talking them into something, having to know that I'm right and they're wrong. Those are all different goals. If my commitment is to make a difference to this person's well-being, there's a much higher percentage likelihood I'm going to make a difference to their well-being. And when I do that and I apply it consistently, when there's a real difference in the world from my work, it's going to come back to me in a way that helps affirm, right, what I can do and diminish these self-limiting beliefs. Because now I'm a guy that's making a difference. I'm not a guy walking around telling myself it was the patient's fault, we didn't get anything done. So these kind of positive or negative, but these cycles form, right? And momentum is gathered. And what we want to do is get on the positive side of that, commit ourselves to making a difference. And then in doing that, live in that momentum. And it's going to diminish that imposter limitation stuff.
I really enjoy that because it comes to, what am I committed to? Like,
Yeah.
what brings me the greatest joy? And I did see in your book the happiness piece and the joy. And I want to end our podcast today. And boy, I learned a lot just being on the podcast, let alone having read the book. And the two are like a compendium. So get the book and then listen to the podcast, okay? Because they two come together, because you get Jon's story and you get Chris's lifestyle in the first, like the introduction in and of itself makes you go, okay, he gets me.
Mm-hmm.
He's not this, egotistical, super successful entrepreneur that has his life easy. Because a lot of people think as soon as you make your first couple of $1 million, life's easy. What do you need to know? This is just cakewalk. You can say whatever you want. No, that's not how this book reads. I want to ask you, when you start to prioritize your personal well-being and you look at already having written the book, what would you tell our listeners that you would want them to do to impact their individual work life and their life? Now seeing where you've been in your life, the experience that you've chosen after writing the book, and now after the last 40 minutes with me, Adjusted Reality, what would you tell the audience to start thinking about?
I would have them really consider their fear of success. That might sound strange, but I find that most people fear what's on the other side of becoming what they really could be, right? And so we live in failure or some state of failure, whether it's a physical state that's unacceptable and unwell, or a career that's kind of middling and not making much progress. We live in that because it's what we're accustomed to and keeps us safe from the responsibility and the possibility on the other side, because we don't know how to deal with that. And so that's fear of success. And that's the thing to look at, is what would happen if you really took charge of your superpowers and became the person physically, psychologically, emotionally that you could be. And how would that change the lives of others? And could you live into that and take a step in that direction? But for a lot of folks, that first step is really confronting the consequences of succeeding, right? It's not about fearing the failure they already live in. It's,
Yeah.
can you accept the responsibility of success, right? And there's something in you that wants that, and it's not going to go away. It's going to keep, It's going to keep driving you to listen to podcasts like this or pick up books like mine. The next step is what you do with it. But it's in there. You can harness it and live into the success that's possible for you, which is all we would hope for from a book like this and what I know from listening to this podcast. I mean, that's what the conversation is about. So it's a real pleasure to be a part of it.
Well said, Jon, and thank you for that way of looking at it. It reminded me back to something that happened last weekend in my backyard with a rattlesnake. And I'll tell you real short, it was my girlfriend telling me that you had great courage. And I said, courage? And she said, yeah, it was fear in action. Because I was hyper sensitive to my baby Chihuahua, and the rattlesnake was going to lose because I was going to take control over saving my Chihuahua. So Jon, you wrapped it up so succinctly, is recognize the fear and what that's going to mean to move into endless possibilities, and that there really is in life, there's no failures, there's experiences, and you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can read this fantastic book, and I'm holding it right now. It's called Spark. And the authors, there's two of them, Chris Metler, we give him a shout out, and obviously our podcast guest today, Jon Yarian, and it's 24 concepts to ignite, unstick, or supercharge your work life. But I'll tell you, read the book and see for yourself where you can unstick or supercharge yourself. Thank you so much, Jon, for joining us today and bringing forth the best opportunities to find well-being in places that we didn't even know we could grow.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Jon Yarian about 24 concepts to ignite, unstick, or supercharge your work life. And remember, it is so much more than a work life book, and it's not a business book. It's an everybody's book, but it'll help you in every aspect of your life to be the best person you can be, the authentic person, and so many opportunities to explore what that means on a daily basis for your patients if you're a doctor, or for you as a consumer coming into maybe a doctor's office to discuss your health. It really helps open your eyes, open your heart, and open your mind to the endless significant goal setting that each of us can do to be the best we can be. Now, don't forget, this podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, you can visit f4cp.org/health, and you can get a copy of our Chiropractic Care, a natural approach to health at every stage of life. It's an ebook that I am sure you'll enjoy reading. Pass it on to your friends and family, because we want you to share. And we want you to subscribe to Adjusted Reality, because our podcast guests are eclectic and I want to bring the very best to you. So share that podcast with your friends and family, rate and review. And if you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a chiropractor near you, you can visit f4cp.org/find a doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in again with you soon.